maybe about 10 to 15 minutes. And then we'll go right into questions and answers to answer all your questions. So if you have a question that comes up during the presentation, you can certainly type that out into the chat, and then we'll answer it during the Q&A session. Also, once we get to the Q&A session, you could raise your hand, and we can just allow you to unmute yourself, and you can go ahead and just ask the question verbally. So either one that works for you is fine with us, and we'll make sure we get to answer every one of your questions during this time. So without any further ado, we'll just turn it over to Dan to start the presentation.
All right, thanks. Can everyone see the presentation there? All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Like Gabe said, my name is Dan Cuddy. I am the supervisor of the MS4 unit in the Bureau of Stormwater Permitting and Water Quality Management. As mentioned, the department has been able to make $19 million available through 2 separate grant programs to all Tier A municipalities. One program for the original Tier A municipalities, and a second program for the new Tier A municipalities. These grants are designed to help your municipality meet the updated Tier A permit requirements, which in turn will help improve the quality of our surface and groundwaters and help mitigate local stormwater-related flooding. I'm going to briefly go over the specifics of the 2 programs, and I've included email addresses and web link resources at the end of the presentation to help you, once we post this after we're done here today, to find contact information and links to documents related to these grant programs. So just a little background. The department was originally delegated back in the early 1980s by the EPA to implement the federal National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES, permitting program under the authority of the Federal Clean Water Act. The department then adopted state regulations to our New Jersey Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permitting program, or NJPDES for short. The original delegation and regulations were subsequently amended to include the Phase 1 and Phase 2 NPDES stormwater rules. Our Tier A municipalities all currently qualify as small MS4s under that federal definition and are therefore regulated under the Phase 2 rules. We issued the first MS4 permits in 2004, and this last renewal in January is the 4th iteration of the Tier A permit. Since we are a delegated NPDES state, EPA has oversight over how we implement this program, and they are required to periodically audit our program. As a result of their 2016 audit review and comments that were submitted to our 2018 Tier A permit renewal, we were directed to improve our Tier A permit requirements to improve water quality, especially for areas that discharge to waters with pollutant impairments and waters where total max daily loads, or TMDLs, had been developed to address those impairments. In response, we reviewed the water quality impairments list and TMDLs to determine how to address EPA's concerns. That review showed that water quality impairments and/or TMDLs exist in almost every town in the state, including all of the towns that were previously assigned to Tier B. And since the Tier B permit was issued under the authority of the state regulations only and not under federal law, we did not have the authority to include the necessary water quality-based requirements in the Tier B permit, and this resulted in the need to reassign all 101 previous Tier B municipalities to Tier A. Also, back in 2004, when we issued the first Tier A permit, the department was able to award grants to those original Tier A municipalities to assist them with creating their stormwater programs. And now we're able to again offer grants to both new and original Tier A municipalities to help implement these latest Tier A requirements. The first of the grant programs has been established for the original Tier A municipalities. We're offering $25,000 to assist with the development of their stormwater infrastructure maps as required by the latest permit renewal. This grant will be dispersed in 2 lump sum payments. The initial payment of $15,000 shall be payable upon receipt of a completed grant application, which can be submitted at any time up until midnight, December 31st of this year. The second and final payment of $10,000 will be awarded upon receipt of the final completed infrastructure map. The renewal permit does not require the map to be submitted until 1/1/26. The 2023 renewal of the Tier A permit requires that all of the stormwater infrastructure now be mapped to better manage stormwater runoff. This broader mapping will also assist towns with identifying and correcting the sources of pollutants that are causing the water quality impairments in your local waterways, as well as identifying sources of stormwater flooding and stream scouring. The previous 2018 Tier A permit required outfall pipe mapping and infrastructure inventories and required routine maintenance of that infrastructure. And this mapping requirement basically builds on that previous work. To assist you with these mapping requirements, the MS4 program has developed free-to-use mapping tools and purchased free ArcGIS licenses to loan to municipalities. These mapping tools were actually created prior to the 2018 Tier A permit renewal and are still available and being updated to accommodate additional types of infrastructure. I've provided the link here to our MS4 webpage where these mapping tools and other related information can be found. Some of our MS4 staff are also available to provide training on the use of these GIS tools, and that training can be done either virtually via Teams or in person and can be provided for individuals or large groups. The second grant program has been established for the new Tier A municipalities. We are offering $75,000 to assist with the development of your Tier A stormwater program, as well as the development of your stormwater pollution prevention plan, or SPPP or SP3. This grant will also be dispersed in 2 lump sum payments, with the initial payment of $25,000 made upon the receipt of the completed application, which again can be submitted up until December 31st of this year. The second and final payment of $50,000 will be payable upon receipt of the completed SP3. This plan, as outlined in the permit, is due 12 months from the effective date of the permit authorization, which is 1/1/24. All Tier A towns are required to develop stormwater programs and to document the details of those programs in their SP3. These programs are important because the operation of your storm sewer system has a great effect on the quality of surface and groundwaters in your area that you and your residents in turn use for drinking, swimming, fishing, etc. Municipal storm sewer systems and their operations also have a great effect on stormwater-related flooding, as we saw from Hurricane Ida a year ago and a year and a half ago, sorry. Flooding may never be completely eliminated, but proper management of your storm sewer system will help reduce the frequency and magnitude of the impacts from these storms. Having a written SP3 also ensures that all appropriate employees in your town understand how the town plans to comply with the various permit requirements through the specific activities that they are required to perform as part of their jobs. The SP3 is also required to be used as a training tool for various municipal employees to explain these permit requirements and what tasks are required to be done by each employee in order to implement the permit requirements. We are currently finalizing the updated SP3 template to match the new permit, so each section of the permit has a corresponding section in the SP3. We are including example text to help illustrate the level of detail that is expected to be included. This template will be available on our webpage as an editable Word document and as a fillable PDF, and will hopefully be posted within the next week or so. Also, each of our MS4 county case managers are available to provide guidance and answer your questions as you complete your SP3. In addition to that assistance, we are also finalizing our new Stormwater Program Coordinator Training Program. in response to a number of requests from municipalities over the past few years. We plan to schedule those sessions during the summer. This training will provide guidance to your stormwater coordinators on completing and updating the SP3 and meeting all your permit conditions. So how do you apply for these grants? Here you can see the grant applications. They're easy, fillable PDF documents. You'll just need to provide the name and mailing address, permit number of your municipality, the name of your stormwater program coordinator, and their address and information if it differs from the town's. And then have a municipal official sign the certification at the bottom of the application form with either an electronic signature or a wet ink signature. There is a one-page list of directions following each application form when you open the document, which includes the email address for where to send the completed application, as well as the postal address for where to mail a paper copy if you choose to submit it in that format. This is a quick look at the web page where the information is located. From the Watershed and Land Management homepage, find the Grants tab across the top of the screen. Then choose the Stormwater Grants row from the drop-down menu, and you'll be directed to the page with all the pertinent information for these grants, with links to the NOFA, which fully describes the grant program, as well as links to the MS4 program webpage, where you can find the Tier A permit and the SP3 forms and other material. So that wraps up my short overview of the grant program. I've included here contact information, such as my email address, along with our Bureau Chief Gabriel Mann and Section Chief Nancy Kemple, as well as a link to our MS4 case managers' email addresses and the Bureau phone number. I've also included links to the WLM homepage and the MS4 homepage. The MS4 link has copies of the draft and final Tier A permits and the soon-to-be posted SP3 templates. It also has links to the mapping app tools, model ordinances, outfall inspection forms, our MS4 guidance, which we are actively updating, links to the stormwater management webpage, and many other resources. So at this time, I'll pass it over to Tim Ebersberger, who's going to moderate the questions. I guess starting with whatever questions have been posted in the chat.
Thanks, Dan. So at this time, we're going to start with the Q&A portion of the presentation. If you have a question, you feel free to type it up in the chat window in the Teams meeting. I'll read those out for our staff to answer. If you do not want to type and you have access to a microphone, please use the raise your hand function at the top of the Teams window. We'll call on you when we see that your hand is raised, and you can vocalize your question to our staff. And of course, if you can't think of a question now and want to ask it later, feel free to email us. So we have a couple questions in the chat, so we can get over those first. For existing original Tier A permit towns, is the grant solely intended for the infrastructure map?
So basically the answer is maybe. I mean, so you're supposed to use it to create the map. I think if there's some money you had left over, you certainly could use that on other stormwater related expenses, but the bulk of the cost should be on your map. If you've already done part of your map, certainly there's no problem with it being like a reimbursement to some expenses you've already undertaken. That's not a problem.
All right, next question from the chat. Question about mapping. I saw on the permit that an impervious cover layer is required for the mapping. Is that correct? If so, how exact does that layer have to be? On the impervious cover layer available on the NJDEP Bureau of GIS, it basically says the entire town is impervious. It does not include small parks and lawns. Would the layer be accepted for the mapping as it is?
Okay, so a couple points on this question. The specific thing required by this grant program is the MS4 map, and that does not require you to have impervious coverage mapped on there. It requires outfalls, groundwater discharge points, MS4 interconnections, storm drain inlets, MS4 manholes, MS4 conveyance, pump stations, stormwater facilities, and the boundaries of your maintenance yard and other ancillary operations. There is a separate requirement in the permit for the creation of a watershed improvement plan, and that plan itself does include the where the location of impervious surfaces are in the municipality, but that's separate from what you need to do for this grant.
Okay. Next question, how do you determine if you are a tier A?
Well, as of right now, every permittee is a tier A. So I guess the question is, how do you determine whether you are an original tier A or a new tier A? The simplest way to do that is to look at the listing on our website, or to just actually tell us right now what town you are, and I'll tell you if you were an original tier A or not. But I can put a link to the list in the chat right now, so you can also look at it yourself if you want.
Okay, so if you, I think that was from Scott, if you put your town name in there, we get the answer for you right now. If not, you can check out that link that Gabe put in the chat. Another question we have, will the drainage pipe types and sizes be required to be mapped? And the answer to this is that only the type of conveyance is required. The size of the pipe is not required to be included. The next question is a municipal resolution required to be submitted with the application?
Sorry, say that one again, Tim. I was answering some of those in the chat.
No, no worries. Is a municipal resolution required to be submitted with the application?
No.
Next question, for the reporting, how does the DEP want the lat long recorded? Typically, we like those in state plane. We use state plane. It's New Jersey state plane. I don't have all the details of that offhand, but you can check out our PJIS page for that information, or I'll put it in the chat as well. And typically we like that in decimal degrees, not degrees, minutes, seconds. It's just a bit easier to QAQC. Next question, when will model ordinances be posted for new required regs, specifically salt storage and tree replacement?
Yeah, that should be happening in the near future. I'm sorry that we haven't put those out there already, but our lawyers are reviewing them right now, and I'm sure you know that can sometimes take longer than anticipated. So I actually was just emailing them this morning to try and get an update on how soon they're going to be done taking a look at those.
All right. What happens if $20,000 doesn't cover all of the cost? Can we get reimbursed for the work up to $20,000?
Definitely the answer is yes, but in order to get the second payment, though, if you were talking about an original tier A, you do have to provide us with a completed map to get that original payment. So you may have to expend other funds in order to finish that. Although, you know, it may not actually cost you the full amount either, right? Keeping in mind, you can use our mapping app for free. You can use whatever resources we're able to offer you. We can loan out licenses. So, you know, there could be ways to do it cheaper.
And here's a kind of a question that goes along with that. For creating the map, can we bill in-house time for township staff in addition to consultant time? We intend to utilize a combination of both in-house staff and request a proposal from a consultant for certain elements of the map update.
Yep, I mean, absolutely.
All right, next question is there an example of the map you're looking for? There really isn't an example of that map up yet. We can certainly put one together, or perhaps we can get an example from one of the towns that already has it done. I do know of a few towns that are pretty much done with this already, so perhaps I'll contact them and put an example of what we're looking for up on our webpage. The next question is, if the mapping was previously done, what is the time frame for applying for that money for the work that is completed?
So if the mapping's already done, all you need to do is make your application. That's when you'll get the first part of the payment, and then submit us the map after that. You could submit the map 2 weeks later. You know, say you get your first payment after a few weeks after you submit to us, you could send us the map right after that, and then we'll process the next payment if it's completely done. No reason to wait.
All right. Next question is, our existing stormwater program coordinator is retiring. How do we formally change the SPC?
To do that, there's a form on our website you can fill out. Another option for you right in the general time frame, though, is to just update it when you submit your annual report. If you make that change when you submit your annual report, which is going to be due on May 1st anyway, that automatically updates our system. But if you need to update it before that, there's a form on our website you can email into us and we'll make the change. Put the link in the chat so you can find the form.
Yes. Next question is, are there any progress reporting requirements associated with the grant?
No, there's no specific progress reports that are due. Like I know some other grants might have like a quarterly report that's due. That's not part of this grant. No, it's just the application. And then when you finish it, of course, our staff may contact you in the meantime, you know, right? If it's been 3 years and we haven't gotten the map from you, we might be contacting you to find out, you know, when are you going to provide that map so we can close out the grant. But there's no specific reporting time frame.
Right. Next question is, what is the definition of an interconnection? So from the permit, the definition is any point at which an MS4 flows into or from another MS4. So for example, if your township system in South River is discharging to the town downstream from them, that point at which your system connects into another town's MS4 system would be the interconnection point.
And similarly, that could be a connection to a county system or to the DOT's system.
Correct.
Or even into like a system for a public complex, anything like that.
All right. I see there's a couple of questions about seconds or tenths. Typically we do tenths, but we can do both, honestly. We just prefer it tenths if possible. Similarly, if you're stuck with degrees, minutes, seconds for some reason, and that's all you can submit to us, we're happy to work with you, but it takes a bit more work for us to get that in the database. So if you could do decimal degrees, that'd be best. Okay, I think we already have a link posted of the application form, so that question is answered. Is there a list that shows specific criteria for former Tier B towns upgrade to Tier A? Population versus saltwater discharge versus TMDLs?
So I guess that question is specifically about why an individual town was upgraded to Tier A. So no, there's no list available publicly that shows that, but essentially there were 13 towns, I think, that were based on population, and every town had TMDLs or impairments, and the vast majority had both TMDLs and impairments. There was no new town that we reassigned for discharging into saltwaters. Those were already assigned to Tier A as a result of that.
All right. There's a question about when the SPPP template will be out.
In the very near future. I was just reviewing it this morning, actually. So we're going to make a few more edits, and then we'll be posting it on the website.
I think this was answered, but it's asked again. This grant is for the map preparation only.
So we just have to be clear about which grant we're talking about, right? The one that's for original Tier A's, yes, is for preparation of the map. But let's say you get $25,000 to do that map and it only cost you $15,000 to do the map. It's not like we're asking you for the remainder of the money back. You just need to use that on any other MS4 related activities. If it's for a new Tier A municipality, then what you're allowed to spend it on goes well beyond just the mapping.
Okay, great. Looks like Scott Hatfield has hand raised. Scott, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please feel free to do
Yeah,
so.
thanks. Surprised it didn't come up in the chat, but can you just get into a little bit the reasoning behind the decision to only give $25,000 to the existing Tier A municipalities, whereas the municipalities that are being converted from Tier B to Tier A are receiving significantly more funding? I'm not trying to minimize the amount of work the Tier Bs now have to do, but the Tier As have been part of this program since 2004. There was a little bit of funding initially provided the first couple of years, really a pittance. And we've undertaken a significant amount of work. We've spent a lot of money and resources, time on complying with these permit requirements, which we originally told would be minimal. We could do it without any additional cost. And I don't know about other towns, but we've spent, I'm gonna say, into the hundreds of thousands of dollars to comply with these permit requirements. And now it's almost like a slap in the face that we're getting a third of what these other communities are getting.
Yeah, I can respond to that. So first of all, I don't think that's an entirely fair assessment of the situation, because you did receive $40,000 back in 2004, and $40,000 in today's money plus the $25,000 you're getting now. You actually got more money than these Tier Bs are getting in today's dollars. Not significantly different, but roughly the same, but actually slightly more. And the biggest reason why you're getting less money now than them is because we're asking them to undertake a lot more new activities. This is specifically earmarked for your mapping, and they have to do the mapping. They have to start a street sweeping program where they didn't have one. They have to create a stormwater pollution prevention plan where they didn't previously have one. You know, there are a number of tasks they have to undertake beyond what we're currently asking you to do.
All right, well, thank you. But let's keep in mind that $40,000 has been spread out over 20 years over a permit program that is getting increasingly more onerous and expensive to comply with.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that. If I could have gotten more money for you, I would have. Believe me, there was a lot of discussion about this grant program, and we pushed to get as much money as we possibly could into it. And $19 million was as much as we can at this time.
Well, stormwater is becoming an increasingly more expensive proposition for municipalities. So you should really look into increasing the funding exponentially over the next couple of years and giving municipalities some funding to do some of the things that you're asking us to do. Okay, but thank you for the response.
All right, thanks, Scott. Next question from the chat. We have, the permit says we need type of pipe and flow direction. Do we need inverts of all the pipes in the storm structures and the elevations for the structures? So the answer to that is no, it's not required to be submitted. Certainly, we will be offering additional attribute fields in these feature class layers so that if you want to collect that type of information, if you think it would be useful to you, you can, but it won't be required to be collected and submitted to us as part of the permit. Next question is, since both grant disbursements are upfront and triggered by deliverable submissions, is there a fiscal reporting requirement to close out the grant?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure the exact meaning of the question. The only requirements of the grant program are explained in the NOFA, so it doesn't specifically say you have to do anything like that to close the grant out at the end.
Okay. Next question, is the new SPPP template required for this coming May 1st submittal, or is the old one still being used as that data was still under the last permit cycle?
Well, the intent is for you to use the new one, but I would clarify that the submittal is not due in May of 2023. If you're a new Tier A municipality, you have until January 1st of 2024 to provide us with that new stormwater pollution prevention plan. If you're just updating it, then I guess that could be due. That was due 6 months from permit effective date, so that would actually be due in July, not May.
I think there might be some confusion with the May date being the due date for the annual report.
Right, and the annual report is separate from the stormwater pollution prevention plan requirement.
Next question.
Well, actually, Tim, one more point on that, since they were asking about does it need to be the new template? it doesn't need to be the new template at all, right? There's no requirement to use our template. The template is just to make it easier for you to create your stormwater pollution prevention plan, but you can certainly provide that information in any format that you want if for some reason you don't like our stormwater pollution prevention plan template.
Right, that's correct. I thought I saw Joe Beach. Did you have your hand raised? I thought it was up there for a second, but didn't see it now.
Yeah, I did. It was just, that was my question, and I was just gonna clarify on that, like for the disbursement closeout. Essentially that the monies are released and then can be brought into the municipal coffers and don't have to be backed up, and confirm that we used all the money. Like, do we have to show a paper trail that these funds to the federal government were used for specifically Najipti's purposes?
Well, these aren't federal funds. This is state funding. I don't believe there's any such requirement that you have to do that. This is similar to the Clean Communities grant. It's rather than being a competitive grant like many of our other grant programs, this is a formula-based grant where you just get that money doled out for providing the information we ask for.
Okay, next question from the chat. Are counties and complexes required to complete these items as well? I assume that means mapping items, but in general, the public complex and highway agency permittees have many of the same permit requirements that the towns do. In fact, their mapping requirements were more, they had more items to collect in the last permit cycle, and theirs will probably.
Someone muted Tim. Yeah, so the answer though is that they already had more stringent mapping requirements back in 2018. They had to map all of their stormwater infrastructure. Then we will have to add interconnections on that list because I don't think that was there, but yes, they'll have to do everything that's required here. Counties, is the same way. They were already required to do all this mapping under their last permit.
Hopefully I'm unmuted now.
Yes.
Okay. Is the PowerPoint presentation available online? The answer to that is we will be posting it.
Well, it's actually already posted.
Oh, there you go. It's already posted. But we do have a recording of this, so if we feel that it's useful, we'll wind up posting it on the same page as the PowerPoint. So
we did a presentation already for a group of mayors. What was it, last week? And that one is, the recording of that is already posted too. So we'll see if there is any additional questions in here that are worth posting.
Correct. Next question. How do we get county or state highway interconnections?
I guess I'm not certain I really understand the exact question. You don't need interconnections between county and state agencies, only their interconnections to your MS4 system. So basically that would be the point at which your MS4 ends and theirs begins.
And if you're not sure where they are, that may require some working with those other entities. And if you need information on their stormwater program coordinator, feel free to reach out to us. Next question is, since the SPPP templates and model ordinances are still in progress, will the municipality be granted an extension to the deadline?
I mean, that's something we could talk about in the future. At this point, you have until January 1st of next year to do both of those. Well, I guess it depends if you're new tier A or not, right? So if you're a new tier A, you have till January 1st to do both of those. If you're an existing tier A, you have until July 1st to do the update, and you have until January 1st of next year to do the ordinances. So we're hoping to get those out in the very near future where that shouldn't actually become a problem for the deadline. But if for some reason some of that stuff is so delayed that it does become a problem, yeah, we'll give some consideration to that then.
Right. Is this the only grant anticipated for MS4 compliance, or may there be any future grants?
it's impossible to say for me what future grants there will be. You know, we did have a competitive stormwater grant program that we ran last year, which many of those activities that were eligible for that could have been things like mapping or improvements to your MS4 infrastructure. So potentially possible that we run another grant program like that. It's potentially possible there are future grants similar to this one. I just don't know right now. Like I said in response to Scott's question before about the amount of money, like I am always pushing our upper management to try and get more money to our municipalities to help compliance with these sorts of things. But we simply in our program, we do not have that level of control to be able to say for sure we'll be running this grant program again in the future.
Right. Is there a list of items new Tier A towns can spend the funds on?
Well, the list of items is essentially what you're going to document in your stormwater pollution prevention plan. So when you make your initial application, you'll get a percentage of the money. I think the first thing to do is start using that money to develop your stormwater pollution prevention plan, which will outline how you're going to comply with the whole rest of the program. And basically, anything that you're writing about in that stormwater pollution prevention plan is something that would be eligible to spend the grant money on. There is actually also a document on our website that outlines every permit requirement and whether it is new or modified and whether it applied under the Tier B permit or not. And we can put a link to that in the chat as well. That might be helpful.
While you're putting that one in, is there an expiration date to securing this second disbursement? Is it the full 5-year life of the permit or Tier A map submission deadline and Tier B SPPP submission deadline?
Yeah, it's going to be the entire length of the permit. We're not really trying to penalize anyone or prevent them from getting the funds if their submittal's a little bit late, but I don't think we'll be taking this grant beyond the life of the permit. So that would mean at that point, you know, your map would be 2 years late, basically, at that point.
Next question. You would like all long and lat of stormwater manholes? Yes, that is what the permit requires. Will stormwater utilities provide the needed money going forward?
Certainly that is an option. You know, obviously a stormwater utility is not mandatory, but if a community does establish a stormwater utility, absolutely, that's going to be a dedicated source of funding for your stormwater program going forward. You know, it depends on the kind of community that you're in, but especially in one where you have a lot of properties that are exempt from property taxes, like churches and state-owned facilities and DOT roads and county roads. All of those things don't pay property taxes, which is where you're most likely getting your stormwater funds from right now. And all of those entities are required to pay a stormwater utility fee. So it can be a way of more equalizing the distribution of payments from your community, right? Because obviously the DOT and if you have a university there, they have tons of impervious coverage and they're not paying property taxes, even though they're discharging a significant percentage of the stormwater in your community. You know, a resident is really shouldering the burden for them. So a stormwater utility actually evens that out amongst everyone.
Okay, next question. If a privately owned outfall pipe within the township is the township responsible to put the pipe on the map?
Take a look. So if it is a privately owned outfall pipe, that is not required to be on your MS4 infrastructure map. So specifically the map that you need to provide for the grant, the answer is no. But again, like an answer to a previous question, if you look to the requirements of the watershed improvement plan, I think that does then ask for the location of private outfalls into the waters in your community.
Okay.
I would say that we're not asking for you to have to fight to get on private property to get the coordinates, but that it should be included in your inventory and mapping, even if you don't have the actual coordinates from a, you know, a private property.
Thanks, Nancy. Next question. What is the status of adjudicatory hearings for those municipalities reassigned from Tier B to Tier A? And does a grant application made by a new Tier A municipality impact their standing in that process?
So the status, I mean, I really can't give much of an update on the status other than I'm sure what you already know is that they were all granted hearings, but the scheduling of those hearings is outside of the department's control even. So I have no idea when those hearings will be scheduled. Certainly, if you are interested in ADR, that is something that you can contact the department about, and we can go through that process because the department runs the ADR rather than the Office of Administrative Law, which would run the actual hearing. And then what was the other part of the question, Tim?
It was whether that will affect the grant. If the grant application is made by new Tier A, will that affect the standing in that adjudicatory process?
It's a complicated question, maybe for a lawyer to answer instead of me. I don't think it would affect you. I mean, you will be certifying that you're going to spend the money on performing those activities that are required under the permit. But I suppose if you know, only perform certain activities, I don't know what the right answer is there actually, because I don't know what you would spend the money on if you're hopeful that you're going to get out of the requirements for the permit. So since the money is required to be spent on those, I mean, maybe you can unmute yourself and clarify what exactly you mean, but I don't think simply applying for the grant will affect your ability to continue your adjudicatory hearing. It's just a question of what you would do with the money.
Yeah, so this is Charlie Cullen from TM Associates. So I just, you know, obviously I think we got letters at the beginning of this month regarding the status of potential hearings and scheduling of those hearings. And, you know, I think for the particular municipality that we do work in, I think they want to participate in that process, but also do not want to get left behind in the grant process, not knowing what the outcome of that other process would potentially be. And, you know, just want to make sure that if they do file a grant application, it doesn't impact the standing of that other, you know, the hearing process. I guess is a concern.
I mean, I guess my advice would be you have all year to make an application for this grant, so you can certainly wait some period of time before making a decision. We could talk more about that, you know, offline to figure out what kind of impact it could potentially have.
Okay.
But I think, you know, at the end of the day, if you don't spend the money and you're willing to return it, if you do get out of if you were to get out of the Tier A permit, then maybe it wouldn't be a problem. I think the complication would be if you spent that money, then what are we going to do?
Gotcha. Thank you. I appreciate the answer.
All right, a couple more questions left. Is the stockpiling of complying curb heads and bicycle safe grates in the DPW yard a valid charge for the grant? Can a portion of the funds be used for future purchases of a sweeper or double wall tank?
So the answer to this is going to depend, right? If you're an existing Tier A, the primary thing you're supposed to be using the money for is the mapping effort. And if the mapping effort is done, then I think you can use the rest of the money for any of those things that you listed there. If you are a new Tier A, then I think the answer is yes, you can use it for any of those things in the list you provided.
All right, next question. New Jersey Highlands provides MS4 applicable grant funding opportunities to participating municipalities within that regulatory region. Is there any consideration by NJDEP to balance that lack of funding availability to non-Highlands communities throughout the rest of the state?
At this time, this is the only grant program that we're actively running, so I can't say for sure what we'll be doing in the future.
Next question is a mapping question. The boundaries of our recycling yard. Would you just want all four corners with long and lat? How would you prefer that to be identified? So if you're collecting this electronically in GIS or AutoCAD, you can send us those line features. If you're not able to access those type of programs or our free mapping application, and you need to send in coordinates, you could certainly send us the point corners of your site, and we would be able to digitize that. I would kind of say that that's probably more of a last resort. We'd prefer to have the actual boundary lines, as it typically not an actual square in all instances.
Right. If also the boundary is coincidental with something else, like the parcel layer, you could potentially just tell us what lot and block it's on, and we could draw that line out for you that way.
Sure, it's definitely an option. We're happy to work with you in case you're kind of stuck with the mapping stuff. So feel free to reach out. I think someone had their hand raised. It's like
Looks like Frank Rossi.
Frank Rossi, yep. You want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hey, Gabe, if municipalities that we have, if they have done this work recently, I have two tier B municipalities that went to A. We did the work probably about 6-8 months ago. Can we still apply the grant money to that invoicing that was done for that work?
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you already perform the work or you're going to perform it in the future. You can still, those are still eligible expenses for the grant. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
His email.
Next question is, can you give any insight regarding the new stormwater requirements for compost sites?
So we can give some. I suppose it depends on exactly what insight you're looking for. Keeping in mind that, first of all, the distinction we've drawn is that if you are collecting wood waste or yard waste and storing that at your municipal maintenance yard on a temporary basis, like less than 6 months, and then transferring that somewhere else, you're covered under the Tier A permit. If you are actually taking wood waste and shipping that wood waste, that's when the Tier A permit is no longer going to cover you. And the same is true if you're actively composting anything, then the Tier A permit's not going to cover you anymore. So that you do need to obtain the WRC permit, which will permit the discharge from your either wood waste processing or your composting facility, whatever you may be doing. So, I mean, you can feel free to unmute yourself, Robert, if you want to ask a more specific question on that.
Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
What we do, we work with the county with our compost site, and they bring in their tub grinder as far as the wood chips. We grind them up, and there's times that we have problems just getting somebody to take the wood chips or get rid of them. But we do have our leaf rows that we actually turn, and eventually we give it out to the residents, or we get somebody who wants to pick it up. So that's what we're trying to figure out. Are we covered under the Tier A we're in now, or do we have to upgrade it?
Yeah, well, you'll stay under the Tier A, but you'll just need a separate permit, the WRC permit, which will cover your leaf composting operation. So you're still totally eligible for this grant. It's not going to interfere with the grant. It's just that you also need to get one more permit that municipalities that aren't actually doing composting themselves don't have to get.
Yeah, like if the county just took our leaves and we weren't turning them.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
But if you want to set up a time to talk about that and your options for getting the permit, or maybe changing your operation so you don't need the permit, you can send an email to Tim or Dan and we can set up a time to talk to you.
I don't think we're really going to be able to change our operations. I believe the county is burdened up with their leaves that they're bringing in. And we're actually one of their larger sites that helps maintain the
Okay.
leaves. Because they send their scarab over to turn them and stuff like that, and then we get rid of them.
Understood. Okay, so yeah, we can set up a time to help talk about the requirements of that permit with you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Robert. All right. Next question is, do you have a list of the required maps? I'm not really sure what you mean by that question. If you're talking about the features that are required to be submitted on the map, that can be found in the Tier 8 permit. Not sure if that was already posted up here somewhere, but if that's not the answer to your question, if you want to clarify that or unmute yourself and speak.
I would take a trip up there.
And Tim, I just posted a list of all of the features that you need to have in the map in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. And again, if you have any questions about those or need assistance, please reach out. We can help you out. Next question is, where would you find the existing mappings? I assume you meant original maps, maybe outfall pipe maps. Scott, I'm not sure what you meant by that question. If you want to clarify that or unmute yourself. If you're talking about everything that was submitted prior, we do have the outfall pipe maps. If you want that data, whether PDF or if you want the shapefile, or you can reach out to us and we can get you that information. Otherwise, you can find it yourself on NJGeoWeb. You can also find it on the NJDEP Open Data website.
Right, I just posted the link to the Open Data website. So when you go there, that's a place where you can download all of the department's GIS layers that are available. So it's not tied specifically to MS4. So when you go there, there's a search field right at the top. If you just type MS4 in there, it'll show you the layers that we have from anything that was submitted to us electronically already. So there's layers for like outfall pipe maps and inlets, whatever we actually have electronic data on that someone's already submitted to us. If it's an old paper map, it's probably not in there. So if you need a paper map, you have to contact us and actually ask for that.
Right, and that EP Open Data is really meant for more downloading that data. So if you have access to GIS or AutoCAD and can use that data, use that link that Gabe posted. If you really don't have access to GIS, you should check out NJGeoWeb. That's more of a ArcGIS Lite. It's a web-based ArcGIS system. You can manipulate the data there. You can add in other layers. You can create layouts and all that kind of thing. So it just depends on what your capabilities are. You determine which of those you would like to use. Looks like yes, got followed up saying original tier A. I assume we basically answered that question. If we didn't, let us know.
Yeah, that's the list I put in there for the original tier A.
Right.
Things you have to map.
Okay. As a consultant, if we have multiple municipalities that we need to map, do we need separate logins for each municipality? No, typically we don't do that. So I just, we need agreement forms basically saying that you're not going to use the licenses for other work or, complete other projects that have nothing to do with the MS4 permit with our license. So it's from Paul. Actually, Paul, I've been working with you recently on this. So if you have other towns, just have them also submit the agreement form. I think I already sent you a copy of that. And the stormwater program coordinator from those towns should submit it for each town. So we're aware of which towns these licenses are being used for. So it's fine if you as the consultant were directed by the town to collect data using our license. We just want to make sure the town is aware that you're doing that on their behalf. Right. Next question is, what are you looking for in the mapping of groundwater discharge points? Do you mean wells?
So that definitely isn't really intended to mean wells. It's points where your stormwater system discharges to groundwater. So that would be things like, say, infiltration basins where there's no outlet that goes to surface water. Basically, I think you should be able to draw out from whatever inlet you have to map the inlets, you have to map the conveyance. So then it either is going to wind up going to an outfall that goes to surface water, or it's going to wind up going to a groundwater discharge point.
All right. And looks like last question, are municipalities required to post their mapping on their stormwater website? If so, are PDFs acceptable? Or does it have to be available via GIS web mapping?
I gotta look that one up. Let me see. Is that something that's required to be posted? I think the answer is yes, but I don't
Believe
want
it
to say that
is.
if I'm not certain. The website, where is that? And so the website has to have your stormwater pollution prevention plan, your municipal stormwater management plan, your stormwater control ordinance, all of your other ordinances, your outfall pipe map, and then your infrastructure map when it's done, and then eventually your watershed improvement plan when it's done as well. So yes, when you finish the MS4 infrastructure pipe map, the infrastructure map, that does need to be posted on that website. A PDF, I think, is fine at that point, but certainly if you have the capabilities of putting a GIS-based map on there, you could certainly do that. At the same time, I think also you could potentially just be providing a link to our map, because you can get that on our website already. So it's possible that we could set it up so you can just provide a link to us rather than having that map housed yourself.
Yeah, I think that would be fine, Kate. All right. Dry wells fall under groundwater discharges then.
Well, a dry well could fall under a groundwater discharge. Typically, though, a dry well is too small to really discharge your system entirely there, so it probably has an overflow that then goes to surface water. So that probably would be most likely mapped as some sort of stormwater infrastructure with a discharge to surface water. It's really only situations where the system doesn't have any connection to the surface water where we're calling it a groundwater discharge point.
All right. And then for stormwater facilities, are we required to map all basins, green infrastructure, infiltration basins, et cetera, for both private and public facilities?
Well, specifically this map, the MS4 infrastructure map, is only the facilities that are owned and operated by the municipality. So any of the private ones are not required to be on that map. Although, again, similar to the answer to some other questions, when you get down to the watershed improvement plan, it's going to be looking for you to have that information in that plan.
All right. Okay, that looks like that's all the questions we have for now.
All right, so, I mean, we could give it a minute. Does anyone else have another question? We certainly don't want to leave anyone hanging. Looks like we do have one. Andrew, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hey, I was trying to type this up. I wasn't fast enough. So this whole concept of the groundwater discharge is still a bit over my head. Even a fairly large scale infiltration style basin would have some sort of overflow to surface water because it's only going to be designed to whatever size storm event. You're always going to have a larger storm. So even for these larger basins in our municipalities, are we going to be designating those as groundwater discharges and then also have potentially an outfall for their overflow point?
I think our intent was that it would only be those situations where there was no discharge to surface water. So I agree with you, particularly for any basin that's been constructed more recently. There's likely to be a surface water discharge, although there are definitely a lot of basins, particularly in South Jersey, that were constructed with no outlets to just infiltrate everything. So those are mostly going to be your groundwater points. Just trying to scroll back and see if do we put any sort of definition in here of this that clarifies it? Yeah, it just says where it discharges to the groundwater.
Okay, well,
I mean,
think
I
your
certainly
definition
don't
now is
think,
three level.
sorry. I certainly don't think there would be any problem with mapping it as both, right? Providing us with more information rather than less is certainly not going to hurt the quality of your map. But our intent really was for that to be systems that don't have discharge to surface water.
Right. So if you don't have an outfall there, you would have groundwater discharge. That
Yeah.
makes a lot more sense now. Thank you.
All right. Cormac, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Thanks, guys.
Mhm.
Question regarding the tier B to tier A. Obviously, we have compliance deadlines we have to meet, but while this appeal is on, there's been any discussion about extending the timeframes for compliance? Because that certainly makes a decision whether or not to go for the grant funding. And because nobody wants to find out that you have to be compliant and you can't make that deadline. And certainly if there's grant funding available, you want to be able to get it. A second part of that question would be, if tier B communities went and did the mapping and got the grant funding, even if they did stay as tier B facilities, wouldn't that mapping still be useful, and couldn't they get reimbursed for that effort?
So, well, let me start by saying that, first of all, there's no tier Bs right now. Everyone has been already reassigned to tier A and is subject to the requirements of the tier A permit. No one has been granted a stay from the tier A permit. We did get one request for a stay, and it has not been granted at this time. So everyone is currently subject to those requirements. So I think you should go into it with that in mind, that you are subject to these requirements now. There's grant funding available for it. If you're filing an adjudicatory hearing, like we talked about, someone else asked this question, that maybe it's in your best interest to kind of wait until later in the year, because you can apply for this grant up till the end of the year. So maybe you wait and see what happens with your adjudicatory hearing request before making a final decision. And I think even if you do make an application for this, you would want to definitely be cautious about how you spend the money, because there is no grant funding available for tier B municipalities right now. So if you somehow were to prevail in your appeal of the reassignment and go back to tier B, you would no longer be eligible for this grant. I do agree the mapping would still be useful, but I can't just open this grant up to a tier B because it would be useful. You just would not be eligible anymore, and we would have to get that money back from you.
So I know you can't make a recommendation, but I guess what you're saying is that wait until the hearings are resolved before we move forward with anything.
I mean, I can't say for sure wait until the hearings are resolved, because the scheduling of a hearing is way outside my control, right? It's not even in the department's control at all. It's the Office of Administrative Law that schedules those hearings. In my experience, getting a hearing takes a long time, right? Like, it might not happen this year. I don't really know.
Yeah, that's the problem you have, is a lot of these small towns that are now tier A don't have substantial budget. And if you're going to spend $75,000 to do a mapping effort to be compliant with the timeline, and then it turns out you don't need to do that and you can't get reimbursed for it, you're kind of out in the cold.
Yeah, I can understand that concern for sure. I think my recommendation would really be, and it might sound selfish, like I don't want to go to a hearing in the Office of Administrative Law, and that's not really true. I think the best interest of both parties is to go to ADR and talk about what the municipality's specific concerns are, and about how much they really need to undertake to meet the requirements of this permit, especially if we're talking about a tier B community that's relatively small. I know it sounds like a lot to have to undertake the whole tier A program, but from some of the communities that we talk to, they might have only 10 outfalls. So the mapping effort and the maintenance of 10 outfalls is not an enormous undertaking by any means, especially compared to some of our other towns that have outfalls that number in the hundreds, possibly thousands. So, I think we might find, as we sit down and talk about it, that it's not as onerous as initially anticipated by the municipality.
I think one of the fears that a lot of the tier Bs have, and we represent two of them, is that, not two of the fears, but two of the towns, is that you get in, when you're moved up to a tier A, you're now in a different room, and you have no control over what's going to happen in the past. So when you get back and you have some future requirement that is more onerous than maybe the outfall mapping you have now, there's no untying that box and saying, hey, why don't one of our towns is mostly state forest, and there's contaminated areas that there's no development in that are exceeding the standards. So what's hard to fathom for that town is like, well, why do we have to comply with something that we're not even affecting? Even if we adopt all the ordinances and do everything that's required, that's not going to change the outflow of that watershed. So, and one of the concerns, obviously, it's like, hey, 5 years down the road, because the tier 8 municipalities have seen this. What happens when, well, you're in this category and this is what you have to comply with now? And I think that's the fear. So,
yeah, and I understand that, and I think that's part of what we could discuss, because I think part of that fear is potentially realistic, but I think also some of it is not, because we're not really anticipating that a municipality is responsible for dealing with contamination from private development that has nothing to do with them. We're really looking at them figuring out what their contribution of pollutants is to these impaired waterways and addressing their contribution from their MS4. So if that contribution is small, then their obligations to undertake in order to remedy that is also going to be relatively small.
okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Got an additional question in the chat. How to identify the interconnections, just a note. So that will be a feature class we will be offering. So it would just be a point feature in GIS. So that'll be available in the mapping tool and in our templates that we offer. Same thing for Excel. If you want to, it would just be a singular point of where your system connects to a neighboring municipality or a highway agency or wherever that may be, county. Of course, there may be multiple interconnections, but yeah, it would just be a singular point. Okay. Looks like there's no more questions in the chat. If anyone has any other questions, they want to raise their hand or put it in the chat. Give it a couple seconds, see if anyone has any final thoughts. And of course, if you think of any questions later, feel free to email us. You can email Gabe, Nancy, Dan, myself, or your case manager, any questions you come up with, and we'd be more than happy to answer those.
All right, so looks like there's no more questions then. So I think we're just going to wrap up. Let me just say before we sign off, we really do appreciate you attending with us, and we do appreciate all the hard work that you do in implementing these programs. We understand that it's no small task to completely implement a Tier A program in your municipality. And to that end, we're here to help you in any way we can. So if you ever have any questions or any forms that you think would be useful to you that we haven't created, or any other ideas you have, feel free to reach out, get to know your case manager, and we're really here to help you go through all this. We want it to be a cooperative process. All right, so I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.